Hey Manny, how's it going?
Hi, Pete. Good to see you again.
Likewise, I am so pumped I've been looking forward to this all day long here as I get to party with Manny and chop it up on all manner of AE workflows, right?
Yes.
And kind of modern sales excellence, which I'm super pumped about. But uh,
Yeah.
but everyone, thank you for joining us for another of our Revenue Excellence Summit, Modern Sales Revenue Excellence Summit sessions here. We have the illustrious Manny Medina here, CEO of Outreach, which I'm super pumped to hear more from Manny here. But a really quick introduction, we'll get these out of the way, and we can kind of get into some of the stuff that Manny has for us today, which I'm very excited about. For folks that don't know me, my name is Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Modern Sales Pros, but also Atrium. For folks that don't know, Atrium makes sales performance management software that helps sales organizations improve the performance of their reps, attainment, et cetera, primarily through the mechanism of enhanced frontline management, through better measurement, better management, better accountability, better coaching, better encouragement, all those fun things, right? Better management, better execution. So that's me. Annie, you want to share with folks a little bit on what you spend your time on at Outreach? Obviously, people are probably pretty familiar with Outreach, or maybe they are familiar with some of the things that Outreach does, but maybe not all the full gamut of that. And then also maybe a little bit of like kind of what you did before Outreach. Okay.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you for having me. It's always fun to see you. Our conversations always go really, really well. So I can't wait to do it again. um, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Outreach, and Outreach, as many of you know, is a revenue execution platform. We began as a sales engagement platform that was serving SDRs and AEs, building pipeline and pipeline generation and getting to the first meeting.
Yep.
And as the market continued to grow and consolidate, our customers pull in the direction of, I want you to help me manage my deals. I want you to help me forecast. I want you to help me do real-time enablement and conversational intelligence to make sure that
Yep.
managers are well equipped with all the attributes and observability of the platform, as well as the activities that they need to take to drive a result, whether it's pipeline generation, incredible deal management, or conversion forecasting. So that's Outreach in a nutshell.
That's Outreach in a nutshell. And then you've been at this for a hot second, but pre-Outreach, I think product management at Microsoft. Am I remembering that correctly? Or and channel management as well.
So I will have the undistinguished pleasure of peddling Windows phones for a living, and at Microsoft. That's right, because it was like hotcakes. And and if you can
Gotta
sell a
be a
Windows
good
phone,
you gotta
if
be
you
a
can
good
sell,
seller to get somebody to buy a Windows phone in
nothing
an
like a
iPhone
difficult
era.
product to sell to get good at this, and that's how I get good at this.
That is so funny. No wonder you have such amazing empathy for sellers and sales managers and what have you. Um, Awesome. So let's go ahead. I want to talk about kind of some of the things that, because you guys have thousands. I don't know if it's tens of thousands of customers yet, but you certainly have thousands,
6,000.
plural, 6,000. Damn.
Yeah.
Wow. And that's only one order of magnitude more customers than Atrium has. I was gonna feel kind of like bad if it was two orders of magnitude more customers than Atrium. Like, oh damn, got some wood to chop. So okay, but the benefit of having 6,000 customers is that like you really have your pulse on like what's going on, finger on the pulse of what's going on in the market. And I think that like stuff's been like a little kind of wonky the last couple years, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of in and outs, a lot of what have yous. And I guess what kind of my question would be there is like, as you guys are kind of entering 2024, and I imagine maybe you guys have had your like, your company kickoff or your SCO recently. Certainly I'm being asked to speak at a lot of our customers SCOs around enhanced performance management and enhanced kind of cultures of accountability and cultures of performance. What are the kind of what's the biggest challenge that you guys are addressing for your customers in 2024?
Yeah. So That's a great question because 2024 is different than 2023, which is different than 2022. And this is actually part of the problem, that it's been a little bit of a moving target, and we all feel like, we're Batman coming out of
It's
the
exhausting.
Himalayas after getting our ass kicked for 2 years. So we have superpowers now. We're coming into this market feeling really
Doesn't feel that way.
but you will. And so, in my job as a provider of platform applications and workflows for sales leaders and sales and sellers, I do 5 to 10 conversations with CROs a week. And the type was a
good.
Yeah, I got a lot of other people doing other things. So I'm a chief talking officer. I get to do a lot of talking.
Customer contact. Do it.
Customer contact. And that half of them are therapy sessions, and sometimes it's one way, sometimes it's both ways, sometimes it's the other way. But the themes have changed a little bit, and the reason the themes have changed is the following. So, like, the one theme, for instance, that we had for a while is this pressure on cost of customer acquisition, right? Mm-hmm. So for the past 2 years, we've been getting pressure on, like, payback, and what's your CAC and your payback, and your CAC and your payback. And that's because the market was paying more for profitability and growth. Mm-hmm. That changed 3 weeks ago. So I just got a report from Morgan Stanley that the market is now paying back for growth. So even if you are slightly unprofitable or moderately profitable, you're getting paid more for that growth unit than you were in the past. And if you're highly profitable and you're not growing, you're actually getting paid less. But that was not the case a year ago. So now profitability is not negotiable, but growth now is not negotiable. So exactly. And we were, like, running in this direction. We all had to get profitable real quick. And now we're like, no, the other way.
Psych.
Yeah. Right. So, like, how do you, so that's the trick, right? So how do you manage this tension, right? This is why there's pressure, because there's tension on both ends. It's like, you need to be better at what you do, and you need to get back to growth. Otherwise, nobody's getting paid. Yeah. And as we know, there's a ton of tech companies out there, and we ourselves, 40% of my clients are private tech, and they're all seeing the same problem. So I don't have great answers for this, but the one thing that has changed is that 2 years ago, the expectation on AE pipeline generation was around 25 to 30%. Right now it's 50.
Yeah, totally.
So if you're not generating, like, pipeline generation is part of the job, and, like, it's now a daily activity. And if you don't do it, we don't get to eat. So it's becoming really, really interesting, the speed at which it's changed.
Yeah, I totally hear that. And I think, it's funny. I was hosting a CRO dinner in New York a few weeks ago, and it was probably like a dozen CROs of 50, 200 seller, 50, 100, 200, 300 seller organizations, and we were talking about, like, the topic of the dinner was high performance cultures, high performance management, et cetera. Like, shocking, right? Aligns with Atrium, not a surprise. Right. And I think the thing is that you have a lot of people and a lot of leaders who, like, you don't get to be the CRO or the CEO of of an organization by kind of being, like, low tempo. Like, anyone who's spent any amount of time with Manny will admit that he is not a low tempo human being. And so I think the problem there is that, like, I think for the last few years, a lot of those leaders have had to kind of, like, maybe edit themselves a little bit in terms of, like, demanding like high performance and high accountability and high execution. And it's one of those things where it's just like, we are all subject to the market, where like, the reason why you were maybe had to edit yourself was because in a inflationary, like, low interest rate environment, there's a lot of money flying around, and you want to drive retention of your quota carriers more than you want to drive, like, growth or productivity, if you will. And so I think a lot of folks have, like, had to, like, kind of edit themselves, like 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. And we're like, okay, like, I guess this is an inbound world. I guess, AE prospecting. No. Like, didn't you get the memo? Like, that's I don't do that. Right. And I think that that has changed very meaningfully. Now, the problem, of course, is that humans don't change on a dime. Like, we get used to things, right? The hedonic treadmill, either for the upside or for the downside. And
Right.
so, humans, so like, redirecting that culture. And then moreover, the other thing too is like when you have folks who have like only come into the industry in the last, like, and this was their first experience. Like, they came into the industry and they're like, 24, like 22 or 24 or 26 or whatever. And like, oh, this is how it is, right? And then moreover, you have like managers who are promoted in this environment, like, oh, isn't this what management is? And I
Right.
think that what's happening is like people are now, shifting. It's like, hey, sales is hard. This is why you're paid well, right? And it's an athletic endeavor from a level of effort and also from a finesse standpoint. And I think that that's something that like folks are really coming around to right now. So if like both from a manager standpoint and also from like an AE standpoint around like you have to manage your deals extraordinarily well. And I know that this is something that you guys have been thinking about more meaningfully recently, because it's like, you know, outbounding and all that sort of like pipe gen, et cetera, like all that stuff is great. But then also once you get it into the pipe, making sure that you are doing the right things in order to advance it to stage 3, advance it to stage 5 is really important, and not drop any balls, because these
Right.
opportunities are very precious. I think you guys have been doing some more stuff around that recently. Maybe you can share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So yes, we have. And the interesting thing was that when we started outreach and we looked at what engagement is a series of steps in terms of you send somebody an email, you give somebody a call, you do a thing, and then the next thing follows. And when you look at it from that perspective, engagement is, you do it for a reason. Yeah, you do it for driving, meeting, a discovery meeting, and then
Yeah,
and then you re-engage, perhaps more of the buying team to drive the next conversation, which tends to be a bigger discovery or maybe a collaboration session.
yeah,
And then you do the next and the next and the next. And so what's really interesting, and sometimes I step back and I think about, when you look at the future, it's easier to predict it if you can nail down what will not change.
hmm,
And the one thing
right,
that will not change is that complex things will continue to be bought and sold by human beings. Like, there's not
sure,
going to be a robot to robot communication anytime soon to buy software, for instance. Like, somebody's
sure,
going to have to get involved.
yep,
And the one thing that hasn't changed either is the direction by which the buying committee is going. So the
yep,
buying committee used to be the one person out in the golf course, that you
no,
close,
yeah,
down to now.
the CIO.
Right. Down to like that person in procurement and finance, down to that person in the user group and procurement and finance, that's a person in the marketing group and the blah, 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 blah. So like,
Yep,
now you have more people in your deal that can say no than people that can say yes.
right,
And that
totally.
requires incredible amounts of traversing and finesse and empathy and listening skills and all the things that, that we don't develop naturally unless you're in this job for a while.
Yeah,
So the tools that, so you're in the same problem, like the tools that we've been pressured to deliver just to help people keep up, right? Like in your case, how do you make first line managers great? And first line managers got 20 things flying at them, you know what I mean? And the clock begins every quarter with it. And now
yeah,
you have the world changing in front of them with a bunch of sellers that came from a world in which they were inbound order taking. So
mhm,
it's a really tall ask. So like, I feel like all of us in the space are rushing into the game with solutions to help the human do better work. You see what I mean? So like, this is why we built Kaya, for instance. Instead of just doing just conversational intelligence, which is the post-call analytics, we said, look, the manager needs help. The manager doesn't want to listen to more calls. What the manager wants to do is know that the rep is actually saying the right things when the questions are asked in the moment, or answering the questions around product, or answering the questions around marketing, or position the product well, whatever that is, in the moment. Because although that relieves pressure from the frontline manager, actually think bigger thoughts, right? To prioritize who going to spend time with, and talking about what. And then the same thing
exactly.
with forecasting, where you're baking forecasting so that the manager doesn't have to hound you down to like be like, do you write that opportunity in? Do you have the opportunity stage? Like, what's going on? So all that nonsense got to stop. Like, one of the things that has been a big aha moment for me, especially in this time of difficulty, is how much pressure there is on the frontline manager.
Yeah,
And like,
totally.
and it's and if you think about it, like the track of a frontline manager, you were a great rep,
Yeah,
and then that gets you promoted to manager, and then we backfill all the managing things, all the
yep,
managerial things all the coachy things to help
Yep.
you and then we hope for the best.
Yeah.
So
What?
that's really the evolution of the thought here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing that, like, I think we're hearing this a lot from our customers as well, is kind of enforcing of I mean, the way that I kind of explain, sales excellence to people is like a high quantity of high quality selling behavior,
Hmm.
right? That's what you want, is you want both. You want like high quantity and high quality. And so good management, of course, like it drives higher volume, but also it needs to inspect, right? And look for defect, right? And then like catch defect and then remediate defect. And then ideally coach the root cause of that defect. And of course, that second kind of like loop I was talking about there can be kind of tough, right? The easier thing oftentimes is just like, hey, like let's raise like level of effort across the board, which by the way is totally fine, right?
Right.
Like that's okay.
Let's do
Um,
more faster.
yeah, like it's okay, right? Like level of effort, like and level of like give a shit is an important thing. Um, but I think that like process orientation and kind of like avoiding defect, right? Like the loop of like identifying defect via inspection, identifying root cause that like of that defect, like, oh, how did this op get in this state, right? How did this
Right.
deal get in this state? Oh, I'm gonna go and like listen to a bunch of calls or whatever. Like that can be very laborious. What can be preferable is don't depart from the process to begin with, right? Like, follow the rest. If you follow the recipe, then a good cake will come out the end versus, hey, let's do interpretive dance while we're making cakes, and then I as the manager am going to taste the cakes on the way out the door, right?
Right.
And then only then, right, be like, ooh, this one does not have chocolate in it. It appears to have something totally different, maybe like bunny turds, right? So
Yeah.
then the question is, how do you enforce that process um, in a way? And of course, like grumpy RevOps people have been like trying to do this for a long time with like workflow rules and like validation rules and whatever, which of course sellers love,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's
And so
right.
the
That's
question,
right. That's right. That's
how do
right.
you do both? Like, how do you do both those things? Where it's
You
like,
know,
hey,
I
you need to adhere to your recipe so we don't end up with like a cake with like bunny turds in it, but also in a way that like doesn't get too dramatically in the
yeah.
way of like executing.
So this is really interesting because I was at an event not too long ago, and the opening statement of the event is that in every aspect of business, the the art and the craft of Six Sigma has imbued the
Yeah,
process to the
yeah,
degree that we now can Pareto anything to the 20/80 rule and break it down and figure out the deviation from the process. And that's why you have Six Sigma, right? Six Sigma has a number
yep,
of deviations that are total. In sales, you have what, a half a sigma? You,
I know.
you see, I mean, and
Yeah,
it's a number of reasons why. First of all, we don't have enough process orientation around sales. Our sales experience has been one of silver bullets. Hire the rock star, and he will solve your problem.
yeah,
Raise quotas, lower quotas. Over assign. Like there's this like one trick things that all of a sudden you solve your problems, and that worked fine in a high inflationary environment of the last 10 years. Now you don't have any of that, and you actually have to get back to process orientation, and that is the number one thing I'm hearing from CEOs, not CROs yet, from CEOs saying, how can I get my sales team to be more process oriented, right? How can I get away from silver bullet thinking to system thinking, where I am
beautiful.
designing a system by which all my people can play and win, right? The
Yeah,
whole like threadmill, I'm just going to replace this person with the next person with the next person, is coming to an end because we're running out of rock stars. There's just
yeah,
that everybody already switched seats, and we got the people who we got, and we just got to make it great.
yeah,
So the only way to do that is to be able to, like, in your own head, meaning not in your own head, but like the sales oriented people in the organization, or sorry, the process oriented people in the organization, map out. So first of all, what are the steps from X to Y with all the different branches, right, that are potential, and then figure out where are your points of risk, where are your points of struggle, where are your points of
yep,
friction, your points of leakage, etc., and then figure out how to solve for it. Like I had a conversation a week ago with a company that is selling payroll to payroll for putting people abroad, right? You're in the US, you want to put people abroad, you put payroll there.
Yep.
So that space is hot, right? There is 2 or 3 really strong competitors. They were coming out of a different country trying to get into the US, and the conversation we had was like, look, we're not having success in the US. I don't understand this market. We're getting these objections that we already have a solution. So should we give up? And I'm like, let's map out what the objection looks like, and let's make 3 hypotheses on how you handle that objection. What could be, you may have more than one payroll provider, and that's how you get around it. Or maybe the second one could be, look, at some point you're going to branch out outside of the US, and you may want to take a look at us. Then number 3 may be, what do you like about your current provider, and trying to figure out that as a way to, get into a discovery conversation and find, make the pain a little bit bigger. But the fact that we haven't mapped that out means that you won't be able to solve the problem, or you look at this black box that is just not producing. So unless you map it out in workflows, it's really hard to diagnose and figure out what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, it's almost like sales microservices, right? Like what you want to do is like create like a little, you know what I mean? Come on, right? Like it's essentially these little functions, right? It's like in this scenario right here, these are potentially the ways that you would do that. And so the question is like the best sellers, as you were kind of noting earlier, like maybe they've been selling, payroll solutions for a long time, and they've seen this story before, and they're like, haha, I know what the move is that I need to do right here, right? But then systematizing that can be pretty tough. And so like if you can declare that, right, if you can declare whatever that little workflow ought to be, then I presumably if like Kaya's listening in or what have you, it can then pick that up and be like, this is the situation where we need to call this function right here, which is da 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 da, right? And so like then what you can do is like enablement in partnership with operations can like declare these like micro workflows, right? Like these functions. Because I mean the traditional way of doing this is like, well, here we have our sales playbook, and it's like a 20-page long PDF.
And who reads it?
Well, maybe, and so it might have that. Yeah, it might have that content in it, or probably not. But like, let's just pretend it does, right? Let's just like pretend it does, and like so like at that like runtime right there, the account executive is not going to go run off over to that thing, right? And so the ability to be like, this is like, here's that situation, right? Like it's been declared, and like. Because I think this is the funny thing too, is a lot of folks are kind of talking about AI stuff. It like there aren't that many of those kind of like read option situations. There's not like hundreds. There's probably like dozens.
Exactly.
Maybe dozen. There's like a dozen critical like of those junctures, right? Like use Atrium as an example. We have like we have a really substantial Tableau or Power BI implementation, right? Okay, great, cool. Like, like I can answer that, like falling out of bed and like do the incremental like discovery questions, no problem, right? And like, there's probably like 5 to 10 other kind of, versions of that. And then the question is just making sure that the rep kind of like nails that, no problem. So it sounds like what I'm hearing from you is that like declaring and then enforcing these workflows is something that's really going to help organizations be more effective. Get to maybe 1 sigma, get to maybe 2 sigmas. That's 6 sigma, but better than half a sigma, right?
And I mean, and the problem is usually that it feels overwhelming to like go into this workflow mapping exercise, but it's a bit more cathartic because when you find out all the different routes a conversation may lead you or a deal may lead you, then you can start identifying the ones that with highest payoff. Like, it doesn't need to be, for instance, it may be that your biggest problem is, no decision, or maybe that your biggest problem is objection handling at the point of the, of the buying committee, or maybe that your biggest problem comes in early when people say they already have a competitor. Solving that opens up different dynamics. So, I mean, this is why this is fun, is that you don't have to solve all of them. You just have to pick any of them, solve it, create a process around it, make sure that people are aware of it. And like, look, sellers want to win. So if you give them a process that win, the take-up rate is pretty high. But if you don't give them anything, and you just give them this good old playbook that comes out as SKO and never gets updated until the next SKO, then it's just going to be like, absurd.
Well, hold on a second. That playbook is laminated, it's spiral bound, and it's definitely sitting right under their laptop. It's
Exactly,
right
exactly.
there, right under the
It's
laptop.
propping up the
Right,
monitor right now. You know
right.
what
It's
I
right
mean?
there under the laptop. It is right there for real time access. I was so funny. I was
Yeah.
talking to somebody the other day, and I was like, I literally pulled one of them out from like one of our customers, um and it had like dust all over because it was on my desk because I use it as like a prop, and I'm like, this thing is covered in dust. I'm like, I'm sure that's like pretty common. um yeah,
And there's
so
another version. It's like the little card that you put on top of your monitor, or like the fold
yeah,
out page that you
yeah.
walk around with. Like
I
there's
mean, I have love for that because I used to be a product marketing manager at VMware a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So I was the person making the laminates and what have you. But yes, putting it in flow, in workflow, and then ideally like listening to the call probably seems like a thing that's would be important. But okay, but like let's step back like a little bit here. Um, so workflow is kind of like a term we've been like throwing around here, but like let's get very specific around this. So like obviously we talked about one workflow, which is like an objection handle workflow, right?
right.
Which we just talked about.
Yeah.
But like maybe we can kind of talk about like what would be examples of other ones, or like if we were explaining this to like, my son's first grade class, right? Like you, bonus points if you want to involve Pokemons, but you don't have to. How would we explain kind of like the concept of workflows and like the cases wherein they would apply in
You know,
sales?
it's a lot. It's a lot like how what's the name of that comic? How a bill becomes law.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh,
where
right,
you
right, yeah.
have the bill.
Schoolhouse Rock. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And
Yeah.
and so for instance, how do you go from prospect identification to first meetings? And the workflow goes like this. Like there's all these different ways that the prospecting can go, all the different ways in which you can get objections, all the different ways in which you can actually get the meeting, all the way that you get pushed off, that you get no shows, that you get ghosted, all the way that to actually get into a conversation. And then after that conversation, then you get offered up. What are that opens up into, are you selling into, are you selling a land and expand? And then the question is, what is your menu of pains that you're going to be addressing that allows you to then land? And if it's just a
One
full
and
wall to
done.
wall
Yeah.
deployment,
Wall to wall. Yeah.
right? Then how do you assemble a buying committee that allows you to go from these micro commitments, right? Commitment to, first of all, to explore, and then a commitment to change, and then a commitment to brainstorm on the idea together so you can come up with something that is actually going to get sold. Then commitment to enlarge the party so that you don't get T-boned at the 11th hour with another decision by somebody you weren't expecting, all the way to like budget and implementation dates and blah 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 blah. So like each of these criteria of how do you run your business has a very bespoke workflow depending on who are you selling. And the workflow, this is a funny thing, the workflow is not designed by you, Mr. Product Manager or Mr. Product Marketing Manager or Mr. RevOps.
Yeah.
The workflow
Yeah.
is designed by how the customer buys. You see what
Yeah.
I mean? This is why you have to like do it from the point of view of like, let me look at your transactions. Let me see how they map out in different type of workflows. Let me tell you where things fall through, and boom, you have your first instantiation of your workflow. The workflow is a better representation internally of your actual customer journey, not the one that you wish you had, the one that is actually happening at the point of the customer.
No, I thought it was just there's like 5 stages.
Right. Good. That's the thing that drives me crazy. This is not opportunity stages. Opportunity stages is like a snapshot of where you are in the
Yeah.
world. It doesn't tell you where you're going, or it doesn't tell you where you come from. It doesn't tell you wherever you're about to fall. Workflow is a true map of like how your buyers and your sellers or your selling organization interact with each other to get a transaction done.
Yep. And so what would be other examples besides like, I mean, I guess like one thing that pops to mind with me, so like in our case, we've like pretty meaningfully changed our ideal customer profile for Atrium in the last 18, 24 months or so, where, you know, historically we would sell to organizations that had like 10 sellers or like 20 sellers, where you get to the point where you're like, hey, like I can't really keep all these sellers in my head. I need like some sort of metrics. And now what we've gotten to is like organizations that have 50 sellers, 100 sellers, 200 sellers, 500 sellers, where it's like, hey, I have 10 managers. I need them all managed in a consistent fashion. And that means, you know, declaring goals and blah 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 blah, right? Making sure that they have like the appropriate playbooks. And so then the question I would have there is, like what we hear from folks in those scenarios is, okay, like we need to involve these other people. So multi-threading for us is like extraordinarily important, right? Like obviously we'd love to get a first meeting with the CRO or the VP of RevOps, where there's like, you know, a pain above the noise, to quote John McMahon, right? Like a pain above the noise initiative around, you know, making managers more effective or driving more, you know, driving more accountability in the organization, or, you know, essentially just performance management. But then there's other people that are involved too. So it's like, okay, cool. You start with the CRO, then you bridge to the VP of RevOps. But also we probably want to talk to a bunch of the second line like leaders as well, to kind of get their perspective, et cetera, et cetera. So like you could imagine like, these are all kind of like steps in the playbook, right? And so I guess like how would that become like a workflow, like this notion of like multi-threadingness, for instance?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So so first of all, you establish, you know, what are the steps by which you get to those people, right? So for instance, a common mix. So let me answer the question first. So how do you establish a workflow? You lay out the steps in the conversation. So after talking to you, I'm going to request a meeting with a larger group, and I'm going to suggest very strongly that that group involves X, Y, and Z. And I'm going to send an agenda, and I'm going to in the email to follow up, I'm going to put some value for the people who are going to show up, to sort of tease them to show up, right? This is why you're going to learn out of this, and if nothing else, you can take this away with you. So usually some kind of like executive briefing, something that makes them smarter, right? Yep, and then once you do that, then you get a permission to explore further if your solution applies to their pain, right? It's very rare. It's very rare that somebody is like, the pain is so high that you got to come in and like solve it right away. As a matter of fact, whenever you hear that, it's usually a red herring. The number one reason people miss their number is because they miscategorize what is an opportunity when reality is a lead. So like, if you come to me and say like, I'm ready to buy right now, and I know full well that for a 100-person organization, I need at least 5 people involved. You're not involving 4 of them. I know that there is a risk there. You see what I mean? Despite you telling me that you're the decision maker,
we literally had this with one of our deals recently, where we were double threaded, but like, yeah, the required humans were not involved. And it's a very different type of happy ears, where it's like you have someone who's like authoritative. It's like, oh, the VP of RevOps says that this is in the budget for, you know, many tens of thousands of dollars. And it's like, oh, okay, well, what about these other 3 stakeholders? And it's like, well, it's in the budget.
Exactly. There's more people who cannot approve.
Did you skip steps? Did you skip steps?
Right.
Did you forget to beat the eggs? You forgot to beat the eggs with the cake?
Exactly. And this is why the workflow exists. And the workflow is not a sure shot. The workflow is a risk reduction framework, right? Exactly. Yes, you may say, I have budget, I have authority, and I have pain, and you may get lucky. But most likely than not, by skipping all the other steps, the multi-threading, the making sure that you got every pain associated with above the line and below the line identified, to making sure that you understand sort of like all the trains of pain that are laid out and how do you solve all of them, that will decrease the probability of you getting a no decision at the end, right? But by not doing that, you're at risk.
You're
guaranteed.
You're increasing. Yeah, you're increasing. Exactly. You're increasing your probability. You're certainly not helping, right? You're increasing the probability of no decision. Okay, cool. So these are good ones. And so I think what maybe what our audience should think about, I don't know, we're like a couple of like sales nerds here, and we're talking about like sales microservices and functions and what have you. But I think that like that's kind of like how I think about these things. But I think it's almost like plays, or like it's like micro plays, right? Because like oftentimes when people think about plays, they think about like bigger plays, right? It's like, oh, cool, we're gonna run our compete play, or oh, we're going to run like an industry play. Like, oh, okay, cool. When we
Right.
sell to like when outreach sells to financial services, generally this is what it looks like, right?
Right.
And so like
Right.
those are kind of like larger quantas of this notion. And of course, like what is that play, or like the traditional conception of a play, what is it bundled? It's like a bundle of these like workflows. And so maybe what I would tell our like audience here to think about is like, think about all the things that you would prefer your sellers to do in a high reliability fashion, like the micro behaviors. Like probably a
Right.
really good example of that would literally be like a follow-up to a meeting, right? Follow up to a
Right.
disco meeting. And it's not just like, oh cool, here's the email template. It's no. It's the email template, it's the stage advancement, maybe, who
Right.
knows, right? It's the LinkedIn behavior, it's the blah blah blah. Like
Right.
it's like, maybe it's probably not like 15 things, but it's probably not like just that single email. It's probably like 5 steps. And so like that's one. So like what I would challenge everyone to do is kind of think about the things that like maybe drive sales leaders, and certainly sales operations people, that's for sure. Because like, divergence from spec is something that just like makes RevOps people's like, skin crawl, right?
Cringe.
Like,
Right. Right.
right. It's just like, oh man, like we're here to bring order to chaos, not introduce chaos. And so I guess like what I would say is like, think about the things that you
Yeah.
would prefer that people do in a high reliability fashion. And so being able to declare that as a workflow in a system of action versus versus a database, like where you can declare these things via like filling out boxes or whatever on the opportunity object, that is not really the actions that are being done, if you
Absolutely. And,
if you
and
will.
and the best way to do it is to like look, you have a sales process and you have a hypothesis where things are falling through, right? You say, I have a conversion problem from second meeting to proposal. All right,
Yep.
map that out. Like what is supposed to
What should
happen
we
in
be
that?
doing?
Exactly. What is expected behavior? And then how well are we doing in that expected behavior? And then measure and then figure out like where are the points of leakage, where are the points of risk, and then address those. And then by solving that, I am sure you're going to move a percentage in conversion or two somewhere. The best analogy I've heard is that the job of a salesperson is to move the chains, which is so appropriate to the fact that we just came from the football
Yeah.
season. And you're not going to get all the way down there. I mean, of course you can get lucky and get all the way to the end zone, but our main job is just to move the chains.
Yeah, totally, right? And like increase your probability, right? Increase your probability, like all those sort of things. Like literally, I was talking with one of my account executives who we have a larger customer. They probably have like 200 sellers or so, so like 15 managers. It's like
Right.
it's a really phenomenal like logo for us, and one of the account executive on the account, it was having lunch with the head of revenue enablement, and mentioned to me like, oh Pete, apparently one of the CROs, one of his favorite books is Bill Walsh's The Score Takes Care of Itself, right? Which is kind of the Bill Walsh, of course, very famous coach of the San Francisco 49ers, and before that, Stanford Cardinal. He was like, known as modernizing football coaching, specifically because one, he actually was the first person, to our joke about laminates. You'll learn this if you read The Score Takes Care of Itself. He was the first person who laminated the playbook, right? The big laminates on the side of
Yeah.
the field. So essentially, he had like that was like a Bill Walsh innovation. And then the second thing was, so it's like declaration of workflows,
Yeah.
right? Plays. And then the second thing is that really focusing in on and telling the reps, the players, right? Like, hey, it's very difficult for us to like affirmatively impact the score that's on the scoreboard because it's so distant, right? It's so distant from you. It's 100 yards down the field, right? Like a
Right.
bajillion things have to happen, and
Right.
yeah, and you have internal locus of control around some of them, but like you don't have control on the. But all you can do as as a player is to do your job, with a high reliability, like high level of effort and a high level of reliability. And if you do that again and again and again and again, and you follow the process, then the score will take care of itself. And of
Right.
course, this is football, so it's like team selling as well. So like
But
you have to do it very.
replace it with excellence. Replace the reliability with excellence. If you operate this workflow that takes us from yard 5 to yard 10 with excellence all the time, the score will take care of itself.
Yeah, totally. And I think that you know, this is so I was mentioning earlier. A lot of CROs and I think CEOs are thinking about like how they can reinstitutionalize this notion of excellence and high performance. And so I think this is why I'm like a very popular like SCO speaker right now and in the last few weeks is because like having someone like kind of like tell the 100 sellers or the 200 sellers or whatever what that looks like. And like the reason why your managers are they want to measure the precursors, and also saying this to the managers as well, is like, hey, the reason why it's really important for you to measure the precursors, right, like the activity metrics and also those the pipeline advancement metrics, is because that's how we get to the end zone, right? Is through a high level of effort which we can measure, and then a high level of excellence that then drives not just the big outcome at the end, but drives the intermediary outcomes as well. That's the first thing. So like that's why we do that. And I think the thing that I don't speak to as much is around like the quality of like the play level execution, which is, and that's why managers inspect that, is to just make sure that like the plays are being done appropriately and well. And when they're not, like, can we help save it, right? Because these things are complicated. Can we help save it? And then also, can we coach it such that the next time it happens? And I think that this notion, I'm putting a deck together on what high performance in in a modern sales organization, or just organization in general, it's like startups but also scale ups, looks like, is like your manager inspects and then coaches because that's their job. They're supposed to, like, yeah, they are supposed to encourage, but that's not just it. Like if you're consistently shipping cakes that have bunny turds in it, that's bad, right? And like you're gonna get fired, right? And no one else is gonna want to hire you. And that's literally your manager's job, is to inspect that in a supportive, helpful way, and then coach around that. And I think that what you're discussing as relates to workflows kind of helps with that, because like, hey, let's avoid diverging from recipe from the get-go, so we can have fewer coaching moments, or the coaching moments that we're having are more focused on more complicated coaching behaviors, versus like you literally use the wrong recipe, you forgot to do these steps right here. The last thing I want to ask you about here is I would imagine that like AI and like large language models probably comes into play as relates to kind of these outreach workflows. I imagine that's what they're called, outreach workflows. Maybe they have a sexier name. How's AI involved in this, et cetera?
Yeah. So workflows is more of a methodology that we evangelize and we teach our customers how to do it, mostly so that we can both collaborate on what is the right deployment of technology, right? It's really hard to talk about generative or predictive or AI or whatever in absence of a problem to be solved, right? So once you identify the problem, you can say, look, I think generative would help here. So let's say for a minute that you have an objection handling problem and that you can't really act in the moment. Well, let me show you how generative can help you generate an answer for this particular situation that will hit the spot. Whereas if you're having trouble navigating the organization and you need guidance as to like what to do and who to contact and where to go, predictive is probably more efficient. And then you figure out where to insert it and how to map that out in software. The part that drives me crazy a little bit is that we throw this like big technology bombs out there, and then when we declare that we need more adoption and more of this and more of that, and then we posit like how many jobs are going to get lost, when in reality we haven't really applied technology to the problem. You see what I mean? Like, and once the technology meets the problem, there's going to be all sorts of fun things that are going to happen. I don't know if you saw the report in the Wall Street Journal that Copilot from Microsoft was getting panned because it was missing people in the transcription from meetings or calling people the wrong names and doing all these other things. because like, if you're not using it for the right thing, it will evidence the wrong behavior. So I think the most important thing for us is that you figure out what the problem is that you're trying to solve, and then you apply the right technology for it. And large language models are sort of like general purpose tools. They're made
Yeah.
to solve a very broad set of problems. You have to find what the problem is, and then you
Yeah.
bring the right tool into the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that quite a bit where people erroneously, apply a technology to the incorrect use case. So, like, I'll use actually our little fox buddy back there. That's that's our mascot for our Atrium's kind of sales coach functionality. And I think when ChatGPT came out, people were like, "Oh, I can like chat with things. I can like it's free form, et cetera, et cetera." And what we realized was that like using large language models to then synthesize what was happening metrically with a rep, with a team, with an organization, that was what you wanted to do. Is you wanted to say,
Right.
hey, like what's going on with this rep? Let's start it with some positive things like shout outs,
Right.
because it's management, right? So like,
Yeah.
hey, let's start with some positive things. Hey, here are the
Right.
highlights, and turn the math into words. Like, hey, here's the positive things. You know what? Here's the 3 coaching areas right here, right? And because that's a behavior, that's a job to be done
Right.
for that manager. Oh, okay, cool. Now, why don't we go ahead and send that rep a little high five email, right? That like
Right.
cites the things that they're outperforming on. Okay, cool. Like we can go ahead and generate that for you. You can go ahead and edit it. But it wasn't like arbitrary, like here you go, here's an empty chat box, go crazy, because then you could imagine,
Yeah.
not only are people going to ask questions that like maybe they're going to get a bad answer to, that wouldn't be great, but also they may not like even know like, okay, here's this like blank thing like staring here and looking at me. So like, conforming it to the jobs to be done, I think is super critical. And that's where, like expert SaaS, like workflow software ends up becoming very important, where there's like opinionated workflows and
Right.
clear intimacy around, like, it kind of drives me a little nuts every time I see people like on LinkedIn talking about how to use ChatGPT for XYZ thing in for like their SDRs or their AEs, and I'm just like thinking to myself, I'm like, oh my god, all
Oh,
these science,
the
all these,
prompt engineers, you mean?
oh my god, I'm just like all these like science, like all these science projects that are going on when like people should be prospecting, and like people are like just telling themselves a story. Like, I'm really doing this. It's kind of like social, like
It's work.
I'm social selling right now. What do you mean by that? Well, I'm scrolling the LinkedIn feed and I'm liking gifs. Got it. Okay, cool. Anyway, yeah.
The pipeline's
Well,
got to be huge, huge.
it's gonna be amazing. Well, wonderful. Well, I'm so Manny, this is really great. I think we're up on time here. I think like this notion of workflows is something that's really kind of cool. And I think, in fairness, this is kind of what like sales engagement started out as,
Right.
but for like a very, I want to call it simplistic, and especially because like sales engagement and pipeline generation has gotten a lot less like straightforward, kind of like just go down this line in the last like 5 years, probably as a result of the success of sales engagement. A little bit. You caused this problem, man. I think it's like, obviously that's gotten more complicated, but deals are just like complicated things because you're like, it's highly multivariate. You got a lot of humans, got a lot of egos, got a
Right.
lot of like a lot of things going on. And so to the extent that you can, declare that and put like, recipes and like high reliability and high excellence around that, I think that's a very powerful thing. So I
Perfect.
appreciate you. Is this called thought leadership? Did you just lead our thoughts? I appreciate you taking the time to kind of like give your perspective, your sales philosophy, your sales excellent philosophy there. Folks, for everyone who's with us, thanks for joining us. I told you that you have a good time with Manny. He's never boring, that's for sure. I'm not 100% sure if there's another session after this, but if there is, I'm sure that it's going to be absolutely fantastic as well. And thanks everyone for joining another Modern Sales Pros Sales Excellence Summit. So Manny, great to see you. Have a great rest of your day. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. You too.